It had been 6 games. 6 games in Minnesota to the Memphis Grizzlies finally pulled out a win at the Target Center. It took a lot of crazy things happening, including Ja Morant with the game winner down the stretch against Anthony Edwards. We got to recap that win against Minnesota in Minnesota. Cam Johnson trade noise. We got to talk about that. And we got to preview the Grizzlies Rockets game. All that coming up right here on Locked On Grizzlies.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everyone, and welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. My name is Damichael Cole, beat writer for the Commercial Appeal right here in Memphis, Tennessee. Thank you guys for tuning in with us on Locked On Grizzlies on this Monday edition, as we got a lot to talk about. But before we get into all those great things that we're going to talk about today, make sure you subscribe and go check out the Locked On Grizzlies newsletter. It's the daily newsletter. It's the one stop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right into your inbox. Sign up for free now at lockedondaily.com. That's lockedondaily.com and start your day with the all new free Locked On Grizzlies newsletter. Today's episode is going to be jam-packed. We got a lot to talk about. Again, we're going to talk about this Cam Johnson stuff. We got to talk about the win in Minnesota. We're going to preview the Rockets game. But also, before we get to that, remember that today's episode is sponsored by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Now let's get into all the good stuff. We got to start with the win in Minnesota. The Grizzlies finally did it. They finally pulled it off. 127-125 in Minnesota. First time they've won there since 2021. 6 straight losses in Minnesota. And when you see, the way the game went, you understand why the Grizzlies have lost 6 consecutive games in Minnesota. Just quite frankly, it's been hard to win there. Chris Finch, the Timberwolves coach, has just historically done a really good job, against Ja Morant. Going back to that playoff series, right? If you go back to the 2022 playoff series between the Grizzlies and the Timberwolves, Ja Morant, had to work for any and everything in that series. It was tough for him to score, especially in the paint. The Timberwolves do a really good job of swarming Ja Morant in the paint. But you know what? This kind of played out in a way similar to that series, but it was different at the same time. It was similar in the fact that 2 of the Grizzlies players that stepped up, and we'll talk about one here a little bit more in a minute, was Desmond Bane and Brandon Clark. Really big minutes for those 2, and those 2 were arguably the 2 best players in that playoff series against the Timberwolves, a couple years back as well. So the way that Chris Finch schemes things just kind of leads to those 2 players getting more opportunity with so much attention on Ja Morant. And they've been taking advantage of it, especially against this team. Desmond Bane had 21 and 5. I think Brandon Clark gave you 11 points off the bench. Really solid efforts from those dudes. But we got to start off by talking about Jaren Jackson Jr., because that's the one thing that's a little bit different. You go back to that playoff series, Jaren was just blended in. There was some foul trouble there, whatever the case may be. And I keep mentioning this playoff series like it wasn't a couple years ago to point out the fact that, the way that Minnesota schemes around playing against the Grizzlies is kind of still similar. But what's different is the growth in some of the Grizzlies players, and in particular, Jaren. Jaren had 33 in this game and was flat out dominant. Was flat out dominant. I mean, this game was an excellent example of the growth he's taking from a physicality standpoint. We saw the signs, over the last couple seasons, really last season, as he was getting double teamed more and things like that. This game was less about doubles and just more about Jaren going against big, strong defenders and being able to will his way into buckets. He went against Julius Randle, buckets. He went against Rudy Gobert, buckets. Naz Reid, buckets. He gave them all buckets. Like it was a lot of buckets being handed out, like it was raining out there at the Target Center. But Jaren Jackson Jr. took care of business. He continues to kind of solidify his role as the dominant isolation scorer on this team. He can take over games in stretches. I call a lot of isolation scorers in the NBA run stoppers. Jaren Jackson Jr. is becoming a run stopper. A run stopper is a guy when you're struggling, the offense can't figure things out, the other team's on a 10-0 run, the crowd's going crazy, you're on the road. You just give the ball to that guy and you say, go score. You don't run some fancy play. You just give the ball to him and say, go stop this run. We haven't scored in a while. Go take care of that. Jaren's becoming that type of guy. He's one of the more efficient isolation scorers in the league, as we've said time and time again here. Shout out to the everydayers. If you're tuning in to Locked On Grizzlies with us each and every day, shout out to you. Appreciate you guys. We hear you as well. But this Jaren Jackson Jr. thing, again, we've been talking about it a lot this season. This game is the latest example of him kind of solidifying his role as a guy who can carry this team in stretches when Ja Morant doesn't have it. Speaking of Ja Morant not having it, Ja Morant shot 5 of 19 in this game, 12 points. He had 5 assists. It was not Ja's best game. But you know what? When the game was on the line, the Grizzlies picked up that phone and they dialed 901-12. That's what they dialed. They dialed 901-12. And look, for you, that number might not go through. But for the Grizzlies, a lot of times in the fourth quarter, Ja Morant picks up the phone, he answers, and he delivers. This was a gutsy one. He struggled most of the night. Late in the fourth quarter, the Grizzlies needed Ja Morant most. He dumped off a nice pass, got a nice assist to Brandon Clark, easy basket for him, and then finished the game out with 2 really clutch baskets. One, the first one, tying the game, going right into the chest of the 7'1" Rudy Gobert. Went up strong, too, because Rudy Gobert actually got his hands on the basketball, and he's one of the best shot blockers, you could make an argument, of all time, let alone the last 20 years or so. Rudy Gobert's hands were on the basketball. Ja Morant went up strong, finished through the contact, tied the game up, and then, again, came back to pretty much close the game out. Anthony Edwards was guarding Ja. He was kind of drifting towards the baseline, heaved up a floater, and as Ja said, it's a shot he makes a lot. It looked like a really difficult shot, but we've seen Ja time and time again showcase his feathery touch on those floaters. So this was the latest example. One more thing that I want to talk about from this game. This is one of those under-discussed things, but it's one of those big picture things that I like to focus on. And it was the fact that we just touched on pretty much the big three doing what they do, right? I think Brevin Knight, shout out to Brevin Knight, he pointed it out. In the second quarter, it was Jaren Jackson Jr. dominating. In the third quarter, it was Desmond Bane putting the Grizzlies on his back. And then late in the fourth quarter, Ja Morant closed the game. But mixed in all of that, because the Grizzlies never trailed by more than 6 points, mixed in all of that were pretty much 4 guys, and we'll focus on 3 of them, because Scottie Pippen Jr., he had big stretch late there in the game in the fourth quarter. But throughout the game, Brandon Clark, as we said, made big plays defensively, offensively. Luke Kennard, 11 points, 5 assists off the bench for him. Santi Aldama, he's back, and he's back being that pop, as Taylor Jenkins liked to say, off the bench as a scorer. And I point out these guys' performance to take a big picture outlook. This is where the Grizzlies' depth comes into play. And here's why depth is important to me. And again, I don't want to contradict myself, because I always say it, and I'm going to continue to say it. When you get down to the playoffs and towards the end of the season, depth becomes an overrated term. It's not as important when you go into the playoffs, and most teams are playing 8-man rotations, which we'll talk about a little bit here later in the show. But right now, why it's important to the Grizzlies, and eventually in their own way, it's going to be important in the playoffs to a certain degree, is because Memphis has the ability to say, hey, this guy isn't working, let's go to this guy. That guy's working, let's go to that guy. In between all these guys, because you're going to have Gigi Jackson back here soon, Vince Williams Jr. Back sometime soon, Marcus Smart potentially. You got all these different options who are going to factor in to the idea of playing rotation minutes. And it's going to get to the point where everyone can't play. And you have the ability to press different buttons and say, hey, if this isn't working, that's going to work. This game was an excellent example of that. Jay Huff didn't really have it, so Jay Huff only played 8 minutes in this game. But you know what? Brandon Clark did. They leaned more on Brandon Clark in this case. Luke Kennard, who's had an inconsistent role throughout the course of this season, leaned on him a little bit more. And Santi Aldama has been pretty much doing this all season long. So the point here is you might not know who's going to be the guy. each time out when the bench is rolling or whatever the case may be. But the Grizzlies have so many options that they're being able to go to different guys. And different guys are going to step up. And we know the old saying like, oh, role players play well at home and not as well on the road. But when you have so many different options, you'll have the ability to find the answers. And in this game against the Timberwolves, the Grizzlies found the answers in those guys that we just mentioned. Now, I got some answers. There's been some Cam Johnson trade rumors, news, whatever you want to call it. I'm going to break it down. I got some intel. I got some things that I want to share with you guys on the Cam Johnson front coming up next. But before we get into the Cam Johnson talk, I just want to let you guys know that this show is brought to you by our friends over at Ultimate GM. Look, this is my chance to introduce you to a brand new mobile game. Look, I'm excited about it. Ultimate College Basketball HC. If you ever dreamed of being a college basketball coach, this is your chance right here to step into those shoes. Ultimate College Basketball HC. You control every detail of your program, from recruiting players and hiring coaching staff to overseeing training camps, handling NIL deals, and managing scholarships. I mean, it's all up to you. You get full control of all this. And when it comes to game time, you get to drop the offensive plays. You get to set your strategy. So you think you're a real good coach out there? This is your chance to prove it, because the way you play won't just affect the current season. It will shape the future of your school's basketball program. It's a game that lets you feel the full weight of what it means to be a head coach and lead your legacy. Here's a special offer for our Locked On listeners. Use the promo code Locked On CBB, all caps, Locked On CBB, inside the game store to get a free boost for your program. It's the perfect way to kickstart your coaching career. To download the Ultimate College Basketball HC, just visit ultimate-cbb.com or dash, however you want to say, ultimate-cbb.com, or look it up on the app stores. Ultimate College Basketball HC. Begin your coaching legacy right here, right now, with Ultimate College Basketball HC. Today's episode is also brought to you by Game Time. Look, there's so many ways you can take advantage of the great things over at Game Time. For me, I like going to live events, and that's sports. It can be music, it can be theater, it can be comedy, whatever you like to do, whatever you want to attend. Look, I went to some nice concerts last year. The energy there is amazing. Game Time is the place that's going to make it easier for you to get those tickets and take advantage of going to those favorite events of yours with a very, very affordable rate. All you got to do right now is take advantage of this new feature. It's called Game Time Picks. This feature filters out the fluff, show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't got to waste your time searching through thousands of tickets. Look, it's very simple. Again, it takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. There's all-in pricing, shows the total cost up front, and there are no surprise fees at checkout. That's the main thing you need to know, because I know some of you get to the end and ta-da, but not with Game Time. No surprise fees at checkout. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. What time is it? Game time. What time is it on Locked On Grizzlies? It's time to talk about this Cam Johnson rumors. There's been a lot of stuff being said, right? Cam Johnson, is he going to end up in Memphis? Is he going to end up somewhere else? You know, Oklahoma City's been rumored team, all these different teams, right? But Evan Sidery made a recent report. I think it caught the attention of a lot of people, and so I want to bring it up here as well. But Evan Sidery made a report, and he posted it on X on yesterday, and he basically said, and I quote, he said, "There is buzz building around the Grizzlies becoming a strong trade suitor for Cam Johnson. Memphis has the needed draft capital and salaries to build an appealing offer for the Nets. After acquiring about Jimmy Butler, Memphis appears ready to make a big title contending move." All right, let's get into it. If you saw later on, because I'll go ahead and not bury the lead here. If you saw later on, I made a post myself in response to that post, and my post said my read is this is more industry noise than anything. As of right now, there's nothing substantial between Memphis and Brooklyn in regard to a Cam Johnson deal. So there you have it. Uh, in simpler terms, the Grizzlies and Nets are not anywhere close to a Cam Johnson deal at this point. That is, I know, to some of you, that's probably not the news you want to hear. To some of you, it probably doesn't really matter that much, but it's the truth. Listen, everything you heard pretty much about the Dorian Finney-Smith stuff was, for the most part, accurate. The Grizzlies were involved in the Dorian Finney-Smith talks or whatever the case may be. We've already addressed the Jimmy Butler stuff, and whatever the case may be. But getting to Cam Johnson, he's going to have a market. He is a player who, again, he's a very versatile player. He shoots a 3-point shot. He's someone that I personally, like you talk about my personal opinion, I would love to see, the Grizzlies show some interest in him because of the way he can shoot the basketball, 6'8", 6'9", switchable defender. He is solid all around. But with all that being said, again, nothing that I've heard on the Grizzlies side suggests that right now they are having substantial talks with the idea of Cam Johnson coming to the Memphis Grizzlies. So that's kind of where the Grizzlies are on the Cam Johnson front. There isn't much. So let's pull the tea leaves together. If you're piecing this puzzle together, you can pretty much get the picture on where the Grizzlies are in terms of trade talks. There was the Dorian Finney-Smith situation. Fizzled out. He goes to the Lakers. Then it's Jimmy Butler talk or whatever it comes up. The Grizzlies, as I said here already, the Grizzlies never made an offer on Jimmy Butler. I know it was one of those things that it made sense because the Grizzlies have the assets and things like that. And we saw, the betting odds with the Grizzlies being the favorite. So there was momentum in that regard. But on the Grizzlies side, again, there was never a formal offer where the Grizzlies said, we will give you this, this, and this in order to acquire Jimmy Butler. So it never got that far. Then, Jimmy Butler's whole list came out, and that was that. Now, there's been, again, as Evan Sidery said, the Cam Johnson stuff. And then you just heard what I said. There isn't much there right now in terms of Cam Johnson talk. So the point here is what we've said kind of a couple times now. And the reality of the situation is the Grizzlies aren't very close to making a move at this point. Look, the trade deadline is still over 3 weeks away. There's no reason to freak out. It's just a very understandable, and in my opinion, it's a logical situation. It's logical because of the fact that you have G.G. Jackson getting close to a return. You have Vince Williams Jr. getting close to a return. When those guys get back sometime in the next couple weeks, you get those guys back, you'll get probably 4 or 5 games, maybe even a little bit more. We'll see. But you'll get a few games to see what those two could potentially bring to the rotation. If you don't like what you see, get a little bit more aggressive at the trade deadline. If you say, you know what, once GG, these first 4 games looks pretty good. You give him till March, he'll be ready to ball in late April and May. Or same thing with Vince Williams. Vince Williams was trending that way to me. He was trending like a playoff player. And we'll see, with G.G. Jackson, he has playoff talent, but we got to see G.G. get incorporated with some of these other guys. I think it'll be fun to watch, but we haven't seen it yet. We haven't seen G.G. in a big sample size or any sample size really playing alongside of Ja, Dez, and Jaren all together on the floor. We've seen it with Vince Williams Jr. Haven't seen it a lot, but we've seen it work. Going back to that first game against the Pelicans when Ja Morant turned on December 19th of 2023. But that's kind of where we are with the Cam Johnson talk. There isn't really much there right now. If that changes, then it'll change. But as of right now, not much there in terms of the Brooklyn Nets and the Grizzlies talking about a deal, getting a deal done for him. So the Grizzlies are wait and see approach right now. I think that's the way to put it. Wait and see approach. G.G. Jackson and Vince Williams This is my opinion. I think just the progression of those two will will factor in to how aggressive the Grizzlies will be once the trade deadline gets here. You know what else could factor into how aggressive the Grizzlies are at the trade deadline? It's these games against the Houston Rockets. The Grizzlies keep running into the Houston Rockets, and now it's the third time. They say the third time's a charm. Will it be for the Memphis Grizzlies? We'll talk about that here coming up next on Locked On Grizzlies. But before we talk about that, you got to remember that today's episode is also brought to you by Open Phone. Look, here's the thing about Open Phone. Running a small business, it means you're wearing a lot of hats, right? Your personal phone sometimes can be like a business phone. And then before you know it, you're juggling customer calls all day and night. And as your team grows, it becomes impossible to manage everything with your personal phone number. And that's where Open Phone comes in. It's the number one business phone system designed to help you keep your work and your personal life separate. I'm big on work personal life balance. It's a huge thing for me, and that's why I love Open Phone. And for just $15 a month, you can love Open Phone too. It's the cost just of a few coffees out there. I know y'all be drinking coffee in the morning. That's all it costs. You get the complete transparency and visibility into everything happening with your business phone number. Open Phone works through an app on your phone or computer, and it integrates with tools like HubSpot and hundreds of other. It also uses AI-powered call transcripts and summaries, so you'll have a rundown of your calls and the action items the second you hang up. And if you miss a call, no problem, because automated messages are sent directly to your customer, ensuring you never miss an opportunity to engage. Yeah, that sounds good, right? Well, right now, just go with Open Phone right now, because they're offering 20% off your first 6 months when you go to openphone.com/lockedonnba. That's openphone.com/lockedonnba for 20% off your first 6 months. Openphone.com/lockedonnba. And if you have existing numbers with another service, Open Phone will port them over at no extra charge. You got to go take advantage of this stuff. This sounds good. Make sure you get that work and that personal life balanced out. Open Phone is the place to go do that. It's round 3. The Grizzlies have got knocked down in the first 2 rounds. We're not gonna say knocked out because they ain't knocked out until they're eliminated from the playoffs. That's the knockout blow. But they've got knocked down a couple times by this Houston Rockets team, and I've been at both. I was there in Houston the first time they played them. It wasn't really a happy locker room, but it was early in the season. And then I was there the second time in Memphis. That one wasn't a happy locker room at all, especially with Ja and Taylor Jenkins. Taylor Jenkins felt like he shouldn't have called the timeout that, preceded Desmond Bane hitting that three-pointer that would have tied the game. Ja Morant just wasn't happy at all after the game. So with all that being said, this is a big one. And we got a lot to talk about in terms of what the Grizzlies can do in this game against the Rockets in order to get it done. I'm down here in Houston right now, so make sure you're following all my coverage over at thecommercialappeal.com, or if you're on social media at X at Damichael C. I'm going to have everything that's going on here. We'll be breaking it all down. But before we get to all that, breaking down that game, as it happens and whatnot, there are some questions that the Grizzlies got to answer that I'm looking forward to seeing them answer. And number one is the toughness question, right? Ja Morant said it after the game. Desmond Bane said, we talked about it. We focused on it. And at some point, they just got to answer the bell. Taylor Jenkins talked about it before the game. I asked him about it before the second game, before the most recent game against Houston a couple games ago when the Grizzlies lost. We said, look, this team, you know what type, they're a tough team. Emile Udoka preaches it. They embody it. They got 2 guys who brought toughness to the Grizzlies, Dylan Brooks, Steven Adams, but they have so much more than that. Fred VanVleet, really tough guy. Men Thompson, he's throwing players around, but he's basketball tough too. So with all that being said, they got some tough guys over there. They preach physicality, and you got to match it. And the Grizzlies are emphasizing it. The Grizzlies know about it. But from the first matchup where all the Grizzlies players pretty much said they were tougher than us, to the second matchup, they were tougher again. Can the Grizzlies be the tougher team this time around? Because that's an important question. If you've heard us here on Locked On Grizzlies talk about certain things that'll matter in the playoffs, toughness is one of the top indicators of how far you can go in the postseason. The Grizzlies lost to the Clippers earlier this season. They lost to the Mavs. They lost to the Lakers. They lost to the Rockets. All those games, those teams were tougher. They were physical, and these are kind of like traits of those teams. They're all physical. They're built for the playoffs in that way, in the way that they play defense. So the Grizzlies got to match that. I think they're more than capable. They have tough guys. Jaren Jackson Jr. is very physical. We know about Desmond Bane when he's getting downhill. A lot of players talk about how strong he is as a guard. And there's so much more. I mean, Zach Edey, right? Big, strong guy. So they have the ability to match the physicality. It's just, will they be able to do it? The toughness is going to be something that I'm going to be watching really close as this game comes. But here's the main one for me, and it's probably the main one for a lot of you as well. It's, will Taylor Jenkins adjust? And I ask that because this Rockets game now is becoming the biggest indicator. It's becoming the biggest indicator for the Grizzlies from a playoff standpoint. You played them first time earlier this season. They beat you down. Okay, so what? Some time goes by. You played them just a few days ago. They win in Memphis. Close game, right? But now you got them just 4 days later. Just 4 days later. What adjustments will you make from that game to this game in a short turnaround? There are a lot of them that we could point out here. We'd be here all day. But a couple that stand out to me, just simple things. Will we see the starters a little bit more? I mean, Jaren played a nice dosage of minutes, but Desmond Bane and John Morant were both under 30. That shouldn't happen against Houston, because if you look at the minutes distribution, the minutes distribution from that game, Houston played its starters. And when I say Houston played its starters, every single one of them spent a lot of time on the floor. Dylan Brooks, 35 minutes. Alperen Sengun, 35 minutes. Amen Thompson, 36. Jalen Green, 38. Fred VanVleet, 41. You go to the Grizzlies, Jaren Jackson Jr. played 34 minutes. No one else played 30. In other words, everyone in the Houston Rockets starting lineup played more minutes than any Grizzlies player, even more than Jaren Jackson Jr. Every Rocket starter played more than any Grizzlies player. Now, there are some, little asterisks by that. Like, they haven't had Tari Eason, who would be getting some rotation minutes. So that is important to point out. Jabari Smith was a starter for them. He probably won't be a starter when he gets back now with the way Amen Thompson's playing. But he was a starter for them. So, again, he wouldn't have played 35 minutes if he started this game. So, with all that being said, there are some reasons why they're playing their starters a little bit more. But in my opinion, you adjust to that. You don't run reserves out there who are clearly outmatched in those scenarios, and you say, hey, we're just going to stick to our rotations. No. This is a game-to-game league. You adjust, and you play according to that. Now, they say this thing, well, we don't want the opponent dictating what we do and whatnot, blah. That's just coach talk to me. At the end of the day, if your opponent is playing starters 37 minutes each, you don't have to match it. The Grizzlies are a deep team. Take a little bit of advantage of that there. But I think we should not see these guys under 35 minutes in this game. Well, I wouldn't say under 35, under 30, excuse me. They're probably going to be under 35 if you've been watching the Grizzlies. But under 30 minutes, John Morant, Desmond Bane, Jaren Jackson Jr., none of them should be under 30 minutes when you play the Rockets this time around. And then, how are you going to defend Alperen Sengun? He had his way in that last game. 32 points, 14 assists, 12 of 20 shooting from the field. And he also had 5 assists. 32 points, 14 rebounds, 5 assists, 12 of 20 shooting from the field in his 35 minutes of action. He had his way. Alperen Sengun had his way. And he was an equalizer for the Rockets a lot of time in that game. So with all that being said, who's the answer? I think Jaren was decent against him. Brandon Clark had moments, but Brandon Clark was in foul trouble a lot because of Alperen Sengun and some other ticky-tack things that happened in that first game. I think Brandon Clark's mobility mixed with his athleticism, makes him, a skillful fit in this game. And Jaren Jackson Jr., it seems like the Grizzlies want to keep him in a roaming position because Amen Thompson is not known, for his shooting. So if you have Jaren Jackson Jr., on the floor roaming off of Amen Thompson. Maybe you get the Rockets to take him off the floor, whatever the case may be, but you also get Jaren to roam, and he could be a help defender against Sengun as well. So Zach Edey is the other option, and that's another thing that I want to see. Zach Edey has just been, one of the best things that I've learned about him since covering him is his mind in terms of how he kind of digests what he needs to improve in, and then he goes to improve in that category. Like everything that he was bad at a point, or he hasn't been as good at as other things like offensive rebounding, he knows, and then he puts the work in. And some of it is just nuanced things like where to set the screens, playing the angles on defense and things like that. There's still some game speed things there and all that. But Alperen Sengun got the best of him in that last game. So much so, Zach Edey only played 18 minutes. He played 18 minutes. He was -4, and the Grizzlies didn't play him much in the second half. So, again, another chance for Zach Edey to show, you know what? I can play big minutes in this game against a guy like Sengun because he's going to throw all the fakes out there at you and whatnot. It would be very helpful for Zach Edey to have a good game for the Grizzlies, but we'll see, how it all works out as well, because it's going to be a big one, and it's going to be important for the Grizzlies to kind of put this to rest, because you go 0-3 against the Rockets. That's a divisional team. You're going to see them again late January in Memphis, and that's going to be a national televised game. But this is a momentum builder, right? You just won in Minnesota. You haven't won there since 2021. So a lot of players on this team who've played for the Grizzlies over the last couple of years haven't seen a win in Minnesota. So you finally get that off your back. You beat a good team and won 3 consecutive games going into that game. Now you got this Rockets thing that's on your back, and they have a really good chance with a lot of the big players being healthy to get that monkey off their back as well. Your favorite podcast now has a newsletter, introducing the Locked On Grizzlies Daily Newsletter. It's the one stop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right into your inbox. Sign up for free now at lockedondaily.com. That's lockedondaily.com, and start your day with the all-new free Locked On Grizzlies newsletter. Appreciate you guys for tuning in to Locked On Grizzlies with me on today. Make sure you continue to tune in to Locked On Grizzlies. Joe Mullinax, who's celebrating right now, the Washington Commanders. Shout out to the Washington Commanders. Got them a playoff dub. So Joe Mullinax took the day off. My guy's celebrating. He deserves it, man. Look, they haven't won a playoff game since I think it was 2005. So big deal for Washington. A big deal for Joe Mullinax as well. But he will be with you after tomorrow's game against after today's game against the Houston Rockets. So he'll be with you on tomorrow's episode. So make sure you stay tuned in with that as well. But until then, remember that Locked On Grizzlies is free and available wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, wherever. Until next time, I'm Damichael Cole, and we'll see you on Locked On Grizzlies.